Parathyroid gland. It's a group of 4 endocrine glands which is situated just behind the thyroid gland. An important hormone produced by parathyroid gland include parathyroid hormone, and its main function is calcium homeostasis. So basically, parathyroid glands, you can see here, is a group of 4 glands, and this is the back view of thyroid gland in the figure, and you can see parathyroid glands, group of 4 glands situated just behind the thyroid gland. And the main function of this parathyroid gland is to secrete the parathyroid hormone, and this parathyroid hormone has a role in calcium homeostasis, that is, it maintains the calcium level in the blood. Again, we can see here that in the neck region we have thyroid gland. You can see this is the thyroid gland in the neck region in front of the trachea, and just behind the thyroid gland, this is the back view of thyroid gland, we can see a group of 4 glands which is parathyroid glands. And here again you can see this is thyroid gland in front of the trachea. This is the frontal view of thyroid gland. If you see from the front, you can't see the parathyroid gland, but just behind the thyroid gland, you can see this is the back view of thyroid gland, and you can see a group of 4 glands, these small glands. These are parathyroid glands which produces parathyroid hormone and has an important role in calcium balance in the serum. Then we can see histology of the parathyroid gland just briefly. In case of thyroid gland, we said that there are 2 types of important cells in thyroid gland. One is the follicular cell and another is the parafollicular cells. And it's the follicular cells in thyroid gland which were responsible for production of thyroid hormones, and parafollicular cells of thyroid gland were responsible for production of calcitonin. But here our concern is parathyroid gland. In parathyroid gland we have 2 types of cells, chief cells and auxiphyal cells. Here you can see the lower half of this figure shows parathyroid gland histology and the upper half shows the thyroid gland histology. In thyroid gland you can see you have follicular cells. These are follicular cells with the lumen having collide, and in between these follicular cells we have parafollicular cells. Here are blood vessels, and now the lower half shows parathyroid gland. And in parathyroid gland we have 2 types of cells, as you said, chief cells and auxiphyal cells. In case of parathyroid gland, chief cells are important, remember. It's the chief cells which are responsible for production of parathyroid hormone. The role of auxiphyal cells is not much known. In histology, you can see chief cells are basically dark purple and auxiphyal cells are light pink in color. And it is thought that auxiphyal cells are basically derived from the chief cells and they are not present by birth, but chief cells are present by birth in the parathyroid glands. So that's all about histology. You have to know that the 2 types of cells in the parathyroid gland, which are chief cell and auxiphyal cells, and it's the chief cells of parathyroid glands which are responsible for production of parathyroid hormones. Just like other endocrine glands, parathyroid gland also work by feedback loop mechanism. This involves that parathyroid hormone and calcium level in the blood are basically inversely related to each other. So that means that in response to low level of calcium in the blood, parathyroid gland will be stimulated to increase the parathyroid hormone. Now this parathyroid hormone will again increase the low level of calcium to the normal level. In case of high level of calcium in the blood, opposite will happen. That is, inhibition of the secretion of the parathyroid hormone from parathyroid gland will occur in this case. Then we can discuss the functions of parathyroid glands. Parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone. Now, the main role of parathyroid hormone is to maintain the serum calcium. So, there are basically calcium sensing receptors in the parathyroid glands which will respond to the low calcium and high level of calcium in the blood. In response to low calcium, parathyroid gland will be stimulated to produce the parathyroid hormone, which in turn will again increase the low level of calcium to the high level. And in response to high level of calcium, the calcium sensing receptor will be inhibited. In short, we can say that high level of calcium will have inhibitory effect on the parathyroid gland to stop the further secretion of parathyroid hormone. So we also discussed this in feedback loop mechanism. The parathyroid hormone will then increase the level of calcium in the serum again to the normal in response to low calcium. And how it does this? It does this by releasing the calcium from the bones. Secondly, it can basically reduce the calcium clearance from the kidneys. It causes calcium absorption from the kidneys, and it also causes calcium absorption from the intestine. But there is a difference. In case of kidneys, the parathyroid hormone causes calcium absorption directly. In case of calcium absorption from the intestine, the parathyroid hormone causes calcium absorption indirectly by means of vitamin D. Basically, in the kidneys, parathyroid hormone does two things. It promotes calcium absorption and it promotes phosphate excretion, and it also performs vitamin D activation. And this vitamin D activation in the kidneys by means of parathyroid hormone, then this activated form of vitamin D goes to the intestine, which is responsible for calcium absorption through the intestines. So in short, we can say parathyroid hormone increases calcium absorption from the kidneys directly and indirectly from the intestine, secondary to the vitamin D activation. So it's the activated vitamin D which helps in calcium absorption from the gut, and not the direct action of parathyroid hormone. So this is the difference of calcium absorption from the kidneys and intestine. And so parathyroid hormone acts on three organs. From the bones, it releases calcium and it also releases phosphorus. In the kidneys, it causes calcium absorption and promotes phosphate excretion. So there's a different role. In intestine, it causes through vitamin D activation, not directly. It causes calcium absorption and it also causes phosphate absorption. And the kidneys, the role is opposite. There is calcium absorption, but there is phosphate excretion. That is also another difference to be noted. So that's how, by releasing calcium from the bones into the blood, by absorbing calcium from the kidneys, by absorbing calcium from the intestine, secondary to the vitamin D activation. So all of this calcium goes into the blood and the calcium is elevated back to the normal. Once calcium is raised to the normal level, sufficient level, further secretion of parathyroid hormone from parathyroid gland will be inhibited by high level of calcium. So this is how parathyroid gland functions. Again, we can see in another figure, low level of calcium will stimulate the calcium sensing receptor in the parathyroid gland, which will secrete the parathyroid hormone. Now parathyroid hormone has to increase the low level of calcium back to the normal. It does this by releasing calcium from the bones. It causes calcium reabsorption from the kidneys directly and indirectly from the intestines. How? By means of secondary to vitamin D activation. Basically in kidney it does two things: causes calcium absorption, phosphate excretion, and also causes vitamin D activation. And this vitamin D activation then causes calcium absorption from the gut, which is the indirect action of parathyroid hormone on the intestine. And finally, all this calcium absorbed from the gut, from the kidneys, and released from the bones will in turn increase the calcium back to the normal level. So this is how parathyroid hormone perform the calcium homeostasis. Now, which hormone just acts opposite to the parathyroid hormone? That is calcitonin. Calcitonin, which is released from the thyroid gland, parafollicular cell, that has a role in decreasing serum calcium. So in response to high serum calcium, also the calcitonin is released from the thyroid gland, which will cause the calcium deposition onto the bone. Remember, parathyroid hormone releases the calcium from the bones, whereas the calcitonin acts opposite to the parathyroid, so it will deposit the calcium onto the bones. And the action of calcitonin is opposite, that has aimed to decrease the serum calcium. So this is just a difference you should know about calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. Then we can summarize whatever we studied. So first of all, we studied about the brief anatomy of the parathyroid gland. We said that parathyroid glands are a group of 4 glands that are situated behind the thyroid gland. You can see here is thyroid gland. Behind thyroid gland we have group of 4 glands which are known as parathyroid glands. And important hormone produced by parathyroid glands is parathyroid hormone, and the function is calcium balance in the serum. Then we discussed feedback loop mechanism. Then we said that low level of calcium stimulate parathyroid gland to increase the parathyroid hormone. High level of calcium inhibit the calcium sensing receptors in the parathyroid glands, which will decrease the parathyroid hormone secretion. Then we discussed how parathyroid hormone maintains serum calcium. we said that the parathyroid glands basically maintain serum calcium by in response to the feedback loop mechanism, that is low level of calcium stimulate parathyroid glands, that causes the release of parathyroid hormones, and that parathyroid hormone then act on three areas: on the bones, that releases calcium and phosphate. So from the bones you have calcium into the blood, from the kidneys you have absorption of calcium but phosphate excretion, we said. In case of intestine, you have the indirect action, the vitamin D which comes activated from the kidneys secondary to parathyroid hormone on the intestine, that causes reabsorption of the calcium from the intestine. And so finally, from bones, from the kidneys, and from the intestine secondary to vitamin D activation, you have calcium absorption into the blood, and calcium is raised again to the high level. So that's how parathyroid glands function. And here we also discussed the histology of the parathyroid glands. We said that there were two types of cells, chief cells and auxophyll cells, and it's the chief cells in parathyroid gland which are responsible for production of parathyroid hormone. Remember, the role of auxophyll cell is not much known, and so the majority of the parathyroid gland is made up of chief cells. So that's all about parathyroid glands. Hope this helps. If you have any questions, you can ask in the comments.